What is the most dangerous self-defense gun made today that you can choose as your EDC? Well, that's the question we're going to try to answer today. Hey everybody, Yankee here. I want to try to answer a question from a viewer that asked me what is the most dangerous gun you can choose as your EDC and what's the safest gun you can choose as your EDC. Now today I'm just going to deal with the first part of that question. Maybe we'll deal with the second part later, but I want to deal with the first part. What's the most dangerous gun you can choose as your EDC? And I want to do that because, negativity sells. So let's do that. Now, there's a couple of different ways you can approach this. You can say, well, a gun's dangerous if you're more likely to have an ND with it, more likely to injure yourself through accident or negligence. That would make a gun more dangerous. Or you could say, from a philosophical standpoint, that the most dangerous a gun could be is if it didn't work when you needed it. Now, we're going to cover the first part because that's what I think they intended when they asked the question. That's what they meant. If we were covering the second part, what gun is most likely to not work when you need it? Well, that's Kel-Tec. They're garbage guns. Case closed on that. So let's deal with what I think is the most dangerous gun as far as you might have an ND with it that you could choose as your EDC. What is it? Now, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised when I choose a striker-fired gun. I think they're an inferior design, and I do think they're less safe than double-action, single-action guns, especially ones that have safeties. And most striker-fired guns don't have safeties, and they don't have double-action triggers. Now, there are a few exceptions that do have safeties, and there are some that have a double-action trigger, like the Walther, the P99 AAS. But those aren't the ones mostly in common use. So that's not the norm. So I am going to choose a striker-fired gun. Now, the first option would be, in my mind, the Sig P320. I've already gone on record saying this gun is not safe for carry. It's more of a race gun than a carry gun. And a lot of people aren't able to make that distinction when choosing it as a carry gun. So I think that makes this gun very unsafe. Doesn't have any safeties. But you can buy it with a safety. So you can get one directly from the factory that's far safer than the standard P320. So you do have that option. You can get one with a safety, makes it a lot safer. And because of that, I'm actually going to go to another gun that I think is otherwise probably the second most dangerous gun, but you can't get it with a safety from the factory. You can't get it with a double action trigger, so you can't get a safer version of it. And also, I think a lot of people realize, or they're coming to realize, that the P320 is not appropriate for, fast draw training or appendix carry. So I think that makes it safer right there that people kind of recognize that that's the case. When it comes to the gun I'm going to say is the most dangerous, and don't freak out, wait till the end of the video before you freak out, let me state my case, and if you disagree with me, feel free to come to my live chat. We do them every night at 6 p.m., and dissension is welcome. I like debate, so come on in, let me know if you disagree with me. But the gun I'm going to choose as the most dangerous carry gun available today is the Glock. And there's a couple of different factors that make me say that. Well, one, you can't get a Glock with a safety from the factory. This doesn't happen. And you can't get a Glock that has a double action trigger. And a lot of people, simply because the trigger is a couple pounds heavier, think the Glock is still very appropriate for fast draw training, appendix carry, etc. And it isn't. And that makes the gun very dangerous because people don't understand that. Now, as far as having a history of being dangerous, well, the Glocks, if you're an old guy like me, remember when police departments first adopted them? It was a shit show. Negligent discharges went through the roof. Self-harm went through the roof. Even cases of cops shooting perps accidentally went through the roof. Now, not as much the latter one there as the first ones. The major problem was self-harm by NDs. That's why the New York trigger exists now, to try to remedy that problem. Glock didn't just do that for the fun of it. They did it to try to settle a case that said that they were unsafe. And if you remember reading the mags back in the day, if you're old like me, you remember the FBI was chiming in, like the gun is completely unsafe in its stock configuration. It's wholly unsafe. You can't carry it safely. And Glock came up with a heavier trigger to try to remedy that. And that seemed to do the job. It made it a lot heavier trigger. It's more like a double action, single action gun, which made it a lot safer. But you don't really get that from the factory. Most people are just carrying the standard Glock, which is a couple pounds heavier than the P320, but they don't have that same sense of it's not good for certain things because they think it is when it isn't. They think that trigger dongle is going to stop most discharges. It's not going to. If something gets in front of the trigger, especially your finger or a piece of fabric or part of your holster, it's going to go off. That trigger dongle is not going to do much good. There's very limited cases where the trigger dongle is going to save you. Now let's say you're negligently pulling the trigger. You're activating that trigger and firing the gun. Now, is the heavier trigger of the Glock going to save you? Probably not. Because most testing I've done and other people have done that support it says that when your gun is bouncing up and down in the holster, or you're reholstering it and you put your finger on it, or you put your finger on it accidentally when you draw it, you're probably putting more in the range of 12 to 15, even 20 pounds of pressure on the trigger. That's going to fire either gun. That couple of extra pounds isn't going to stop that. So it's pretty much as dangerous in 99% of the situations as the P320, but people don't realize that. So they think they're safe, and they go on appendix carrying, fast draw training, etc. So you're more likely to have an ND because people aren't as wary. And like I said, the gun has a history of being dangerous, just like the P320 does. In fact, these guns became hand grenades there for a while, if you remember, if you're old enough. They were just blowing up the 40 calibers. At least that's what people were saying. You know, the unsupported chamber for the 40. The guns were time bombs. They were hand grenades. One of the biggest cases was from right here, across the river in Portland, Oregon. Look it up if you're interested. I mean, it's all over the internet. That was recent enough that it's got internet coverage. So go over, check it out. But like I said, that's not why I'm saying it's dangerous. The main reason I think it's dangerous is because it's dangerous in the same ways the P320 is. Maybe slightly less so because the trigger's heavy, but people don't realize it. They still go about appendix carrying it. In fact, when I did a video a couple of years ago looking up negligent discharges while appendix carrying where people were injured or killed to try to disparage appendix carry and encourage people not to do it, 7 out of the 10 cases I found were Glocks. Now, I'm not saying that makes Glock, necessarily more dangerous than other guns that they're having a problem with. It's just they're more common. And that kind of supports my belief. People think they're safe. They're very popular. People buy them and then they carry them in ways they shouldn't, or they do things with them they shouldn't, thinking they're safer. They're not really that much safer. They're just as dangerous as a P320, except in like maybe 0.05% of the times where there's enough pressure put on a trigger that would not fire a Glock but would fire a P320, and that's going to be very rare. In the instances where it's more likely that you'll have an ND, the Glock is just as dangerous, like reholstering, putting your finger on the trigger when you draw, part of your holster hitting it, your shirt hitting it, being in an improper holster. Both guns have the same issues. We've seen that through history with the Glock, time and time again, to a much higher degree than we have with the P320 even. So that misconception that people think this gun is much safer than the P320, even though the P320 might be 5% less safe, causes people to do things with this gun they wouldn't do with the other, and therefore I think the Glock is the least safe gun you could possibly choose to carry, simply because most people don't really know how they should be carrying it, what they should be doing with it, and what they shouldn't.